I told you last time of this journey of mine into the Kalahari desert, this desert in the heart of southern Africa. I told you of this journey of mine looking for the vanished people of southern Africa, the Bushmen. And I told you how my journey had taken me from the Victoria Falls here, all along the edges of these swamps, right round to a place called Mohembo on the Okavango River, and how we had gone into the swamps for about 300 miles, and how, at a place called the place of the eddies in the swamps, we had found not the bushmen of the veld, not the hunters of the plain, but 3 river bushmen. Now we gave them some presents and stayed with them for a while, recording their ways and their history. When we played back their recordings, they were so startled by the magic of it all that they replied again to our questions wherever they heard them on the tape. We left our river bushmen thinking sadly that one day when they died, their like would never be seen again in the world. And we left them to start the next phase of our journey, a serious probe in the desert for the other great branch of the Bushman family, the veld bushman, the hunter of the plains. And we were starting our journey with a strange group of hills, the Tsodilo Hills, the hills you see here, a strange group of hills rising sheer out of the desert. And we had as a guide a man called Samuchosa. He told me then that these hills, the Tsodilo Hills, a bushman name meaning the slippery hills, were the home of powerful spirits. On the main hill there was a sacred spring which never failed. Beside the spring, a tree with the fruit of good and evil on it, and nearby a rock with the knee marks where the Great Spirit had knelt on it to pray the day he made the world. In the caves and the rocks of the hills dwelt the spirits of all the great animals in the desert, and their hoof marks could be seen among the rocks. He told me that he had often done the hazardous journey to the hills to go and pray to the spirits for the welfare of his people, and he said that he would only come with me as a guide, provided I promised that none of us would shoot or kill any animal or even insect on the way, because it was an immutable law of the spirits that no man was allowed to come to them with blood on his hands. I agreed readily enough at the time that there would be no killing, and Samuchoso said he would come. But on the morning we set out for the hills, he told me that he was feeling very weak. He begged me to go to a place nearby in the swamps and to fetch his son to come and help him. Johnny and I set off in my field car to do so. We hadn't gone far when we met a bushman in a clearing. He put on trousers for the traders he was visiting on the river. But he was pure bushman for all that, and excited us by saying he'd met a party of bushmen on their way to the slippery hills, only a moon before. Soon after, we came to the old prophet's son, Samuchao. Samuchao was sitting outside his hut, mending his fishing baskets in the heat of the day. It was characteristic of this spontaneous river people that when I told him his father wanted him, he asked no questions. He just stood up, said goodbye quite casually to his wife and children, and climbed into my vehicle with me. I rejoined my main party late that evening, camped deep in the bush, about 25 miles on the way to the slippery hills. And I cannot to this day understand why I didn't tell my party there and then that I'd promised Samuchoso there would be no shooting. I can only explain it by saying that I was extremely tired, that I'd been on the road for weeks, and I'd worked very hard. But somehow my promise slipped my memory, and I forgot it the next morning. Early the next morning, I sent Johnny and Brian Curry on ahead. I came behind in another truck with Duncan Abraham filming. We hadn't been on the road 1 hour when I heard ahead of me, just like that, 2 shots ring out, and my heart sank. I realized at once what I'd done. But for the moment, with the sort of facile optimism one has on those occasions, I said to myself, oh, they've probably missed. Well, I reckon without my Brian and without my Johnny. We caught up with them, and the first thing I saw was Brian and Johnny looking at a warthog. And I saw Samuchosa standing nearby, and I shall never, never forget the look on his face. I went up to him at once, and I said, Samuchosa, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I forgot to tell them. He accepted my apology gracefully, but in a way which intimated that it was hardly for him to accept at all. I've never seen a warthog look more a thing of evil, and I was glad to try and forget it in the task of finding our way through the heavy sand and scrub. But all went well. All went well, that is, for a while. Now, the Tsodilo Hills are perhaps not much as hills would go in true hill country, but after 6 weeks in flat, sandy country, they made a curious, almost supernatural impression on our eyes. Master, Jeremiah said to me, with a note of awe in his voice, they like the rocks Moses hit in the desert to get water for the Israelites. Jeremiah had hardly spoken when for the first time my car engine failed. All the while I found, comparing notes later, we were all becoming more and more uneasy about the slippery hills as they came nearer and nearer to us. They rose so sheer and so silent on an empty world of sand and bush, and they were the only ones of their kind for hundreds of miles around. We should have been among those hills in the afternoon, but we didn't get to camp until the sun went down. Round our fire that night, I found my own uneasiness growing and looked about me. I thought the same was true of my companions. Instinctively, I repeated my apology of regret to Samuchosa for the shooting. Again, he nodded gracefully, but intimated that it didn't concern him so much as whatever presided over those strange hills in the night beyond our flickering fire. Early the next morning, I got my party ready to explore the hills. Samuchao came to explain that his father had gone off alone in the hills to pray, but had told him to guide us to the sacred water. Then we forced our way through immensely thick thorn bush along the base of the hills. The strange cliffs seemed to look down silently and disapprovingly upon us, and we were amazed to see the tamest animals we had yet met, no doubt because they were herded by a spirit of the hills. I forbade Brian or Johnny, who were greatly tempted, even to aim their guns at any of the animals. A mile from camp, Samuchao picked up human spoor and beckoned us to follow quickly. Alas, we were too late. The spoor was at least a month old. What made it sadder, it was without doubt the spoor of true felt bushmen. The traces were unmistakable. There were the characteristic heaps of cracked and empty Kalahari nutshells. There were the giraffe knuckle bones, which the bushmen loved so much for their delicious marrow. There was a discarded bushman harp, which Samuchao fingered lovingly. There was a leather bushman bag with ostrich egg beads attached to the strap. And finally, there was a typical bushman shelter. No doubt bushmen had been living there for many weeks. Half an hour's climb from there brought us to the last rocky ledge of the summit. And close by, Samuchao showed us the marks in the rock where the Great Spirit had first knelt in prayer, and he himself got down on his knees to show us how the Spirit had prayed. He pointed out to us the magic spoor in the rock, something which could not be explained by wind or water, but was clearly the hoof mark of an antelope. And then we came to the pool of sacred water. Close by lay a wooden scoop discarded by the bushmen. We took it down to the water, and with it filled our flasks against the thirsty afternoon. Just beyond the pool, we came at last to the tree of good and evil, just as Samuchozo had foretold. Well, you may have noticed how short that last shot was. Well, I must tell you that all that day we've been having intense camera trouble. Magazine after magazine jammed, and Duncan Abrahams said that in all his 6 years of experience as a cameraman, he'd never seen the like of it before. We went back to camp that night, and there we had another disappointment. The hyenas were howling all round our camp, as Samuchozo said, like the spirits of departed men. We tried to record them. Our brand new recording machine, which had behaved so admirably up to now, failed us. We failed to repair it. Duncan Abraham worked until late that night, putting his magazines right. At the end of it he said, well, I'll show those spirits tomorrow. But I couldn't help thinking he was being unduly provocative, particularly when I saw the way Samuchozo looked at him. Soon after sunrise we returned to the hills. The rocks on this morning looked to me more forbidding than ever before. Somehow I was not in the least bit surprised when very soon after we began filming them, to hear Duncan Abraham swearing in the most uninhibited fashion. His camera had failed again, and the frames were slipping in on one another, as you can see them here. We made a laborious repair and adjustment, and then filmed our first rock paintings at the base of the main hills. An immense frieze, this, about 90 feet long and 17 feet high, and once upon a time covered with a crowded pageant of flame-like animal life. Now, however, it was faded, yet still showed clearly some giraffe, some hartebeest, a tortoise, a baboon and rhinoceros, which strangely enough no longer exists in the Kalahari. We sat there in the shade making tracings of the drawings and had more camera trouble. That repaired, we started up the cliff. Samut Chow insisted on leading the way. I followed with Charles and Duncan behind. Again, it was 120 in the shade. And what was worse, our hoodoo, as you'll notice from the film, followed us all the way to the top. Our camera kept on slipping. Looking back, I think we're lucky our feet didn't slip as well. But once on top, we held our breath. Far below us, the endless Kalahari bush stretched away for more than 100 miles, and there wasn't a wisp of smoke or dust to trouble the peace of the view. And over this view there curved a slab of smooth, honey-colored stone, and from this slab there looked down on us a lovely giraffe and a majestic eland bull, painted in bright vermilion, a truly magical sight. Below the eland were some rhino, but what moved me most was that the forgotten bushman artist had daubed his little hands in his own paint and pressed them there as a sort of signature to his great work. Clearly this ledge, an overhanging rock, was all that was left of what had once been an immense cave, and we accordingly believed those paintings to have been some thousands of years old. We wanted to go on filming, but here our camera broke down for the last time that day. We repaired them again, and as we did so, Samuchozo asked me, "Would you like me, master, to find out what is wrong?" He took out a needle and stared at it, saying, "Master, the spirits are angry, because you've come to them with blood on your hands. They're so angry that if they didn't know that your heart was pure, they would have destroyed you all. As it is, they've decided to punish you by punishing your machines." As he spoke, our cameras jammed again. I began to fear our admirable field cars would be failing us next. But that night I had an idea. I said to Samuchozo, Suppose I were to write a letter to the spirits begging their pardon, and suppose we were to put it in a bottle and take it up to the hills and bury it at the foot of the great Irland for them to fetch and to read and take away. Do you think that would help? Well, then, he said, I think it's a very good idea. I sat down there and then and wrote the letter of which you see a copy here. We humbly beg the pardon of the great spirits of these slippery hills, and for any disrespect we may have shown them, and for any disturbance we may have caused in their ancient resting place. We bury this letter at the foot of this painting, which is so clearly evidence of their power to move flesh and blood to create beyond itself. And we implored them, those who come after us, to reflect on this letter and to show the spirits greater respect than we have done. We buried it at the foot of the great Irland at dawn next day. And as I looked out over that immense Kalahari view for the last time, I found myself deeply moved. Samo Jozo, I said, do you think all is well now? He took out his old needle, threaded it again, and put it in his palm. And he stood there with that lovely dawn light expanding and breaking over the hills. And he said after a while, Master, all is well. But the spirits asked me to say that when you come to this place you're going to mend your machines, you will find some more unhappiness waiting for you. But you must not be anxious, because it's an unhappiness that belongs to the past, and not to today or tomorrow. We left the slippery hills then, and we came right the way round here to a small police outpost there. And when we got there, we found a telegram waiting for Charles Leonard, saying that his father had died a month before, and that he was wanted at home. And from there, I did a 1,000-mile journey out to Johannesburg to repair our machines, and I came back to this place again. And when I got back there, we started on our journey for the Central Desert. And it was as if we had moved into quite another dimension of living, because where things had gone so much against us before, it now seemed that nothing could go wrong with us anymore. Then, my back to the great waters of the north. We had a last nostalgic look at Lake Ngami, and then pushed on deeper into the desert, passing skeleton after skeleton, to remind us of the great thirst ahead. We followed tracks I'd made nearly 3 years before with heavier vehicles, and so unvisited is the Central Desert that the tracks were still perfectly legible. We began to meet one of the main features of the Central Desert, those strange, shimmering depressions the old Kalahari hands call pans. Beyond the pans we entered a hard world of steel-like thorn, which clutched at our vehicles and left long scars in the process. Nonetheless, these bushes are home to me, and I find their unending variety of shapes and outlines against the blue sky a constant delight to look on. We moved on like this for a week, crossing thorn and pan after pan in this way. Each pan seemed to have its own ostrich in charge. It got hotter. The slight cloud in the sky only stressed the blueness and the emptiness of it all. We pressed on till we came to our last oasis, seeking water and news of bushmen. It's an amazing place, this oasis. It maintains some hundreds of people of a mixed race called Kalahari. It possessed only a couple of wells like these to supply these people and their cattle. The wells are busy from dawn to dusk, and yet the cattle and the people look surprisingly well on the water. One reason why these people manage so well in their harsh desert surrounding is because they have a strong mixture of bushman blood, as you can see in their faces. You'll notice how many of these women, for instance, in different clothing and in a different setting might pass for Mongols, always a true sign of ancient bushman blood. Look at the slanted eyes and the pointed ears of these women. We reached this oasis just as the camel patrol of the small, purely African force who manned the remote outpost was setting out on desert patrol. The men told me the sergeant in charge was still at their base, and I hastened to call on him. He's an old friend for whom I have the deepest respect. Although he sees European superiors only once a year, he runs his little station with great circumspection. He sees, for instance, that the flag is struck every evening at sunset, and that it is hoisted every morning at sunrise with the appropriate ritual. I've arrived at this outpost for many years at all sorts of unexpected hours and never found the ritual wanting. Always his sense of order is beyond praise. It's a sort of order human beings produce only when they truly love the value behind the exterior. We saw the flag raised next morning and then set off again. The day was like steel, and by noon the temperature was back at 120. We were forced to rest ourselves and our vehicles for a while, and it was amazing how easily everyone flopped out in the nearest shade. My sergeant had warned me that most of the people in the central desert were already on the way out, driven out by the lack of water and hunger. We were startled to hear loud shouts break in on our rest that afternoon. Crossing the edge of the pan, nearby, a group of people came running towards our vehicles. They were some mongrel bushmen on their way to the police post and desperate with thirst. We knew at once what they were coming for and uncovered our water tanks to help them. We filled some cans with fresh water and poured it out into a cracked enamel bowl which they held out to us. You can see how thirsty they were from the way the youngsters went on drinking at the leak while the grown-ups drank on top. One old lady who could hardly stop drinking said that the water running out of one of our tanks was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen in her life. While she drank, another satisfied old lady sat in the shade nearby, digging out cool sand to throw over herself, just as elephants do to keep cool. We went deeper south, and we cast round here in this central part of the Kalahari. All the time, it got hotter and it got drier, but we found no bushmen. Until one day I thought we were really going to strike it lucky. We were just here when I heard Dabe one afternoon giving a great shout. And then in the distance we saw a party of people coming through the scrub and the sand towards us. They looked the authentic bushmen. Our excitement was intense. But alas, when they came nearer, although we realized that they were the nearest thing to the felt bushmen we'd yet struck, they were not what we sought. Firstly, they had to be suspect because they were on their way out to some outpost for relief. They were dazed by the sun and lack of food and water. We were all deeply moved by their emaciated bodies and sunken faces. But also clearly, they were too tall and lanky for the true bushman kind. Some of the women may have been pure bushmen, particularly this newly married girl with the ritual mark still fresh on her cheeks. So, her friend with that truly Chinese face. But we quickly realized that they'd been spoilt for our purpose by years of contact with civilization. We gave them all the water we could, and we had an inkling of the hardships they suffered by watching a mother squeeze the juices of some desert potato into the dry throat of a little boy. They told us that for a month they'd been living on nothing but the juice of this wild potato to drink. We felt so sorry for them that we made our camp for the night with them and made Jeremiah cook them the biggest meal we could afford. It was a happy night, that, listening to them singing once more with their tummies full. And in the early morning, while some of the members of our expedition were still in bed, Dabe and I got them ready for our recording microphones. There was no longer an evil spell on our recording machine, and for 2 hours in the cool of the morning, we recorded their music. As a parting present, they gave us some news. About 5 days' march to the northeast, they said, there was a party of true wild bushmen left. The wild bushmen were grouped round one of the few sip wells in the central Kalahari desert. 2 days later, Johnny came back from a hunt, accompanied by an old man, also on his way out of the hot desert. This old man confirmed the news. He told us that those fabulous sip wells were only 2 days' march northeast of us. He was accompanied by a group of the most enchanting children with true little bushman faces. He called them out of the bush and with his wife paraded them one by one for us. Then we pushed on as fast as we could along an old police patrol track. "50 miles beyond, we came to one of the great sand dunes which line the deep, dry watercourse in the desert. We struggled up through the bush and sand to the top of the dune. We looked down on an immense stretch of country in which the sip wells were said to be situated. Again, I was surprised to see my old tracks from 3 years before crossing my line of vision. I climbed on the roof of my car. I stood there with a hot wind blowing straight in my face. I looked and looked and looked down into the bottom of the dry river bed. Something had appeared to be moving. I called Dabe, who has the eyes of an eagle. He only had to stand on the bonnet and give one glance before saying, "Master, a wild, wild man in the grass down there." We hurried on down the sides of the dune as quietly as we could go. Even so, we wouldn't have been silent enough if it hadn't been for the wind blowing from the wild, wild man straight to us and for the sun shining straight into the wild, wild man's eyes. 100 yards from the place where the wild man was, we stopped. We jumped out. We pushed Dabe forward, still afraid the wild man might run. Dabe stepped out, hat in hand, and called out the politest bushman greeting, saying, "Sham Kankay, good day. I saw you from afar, and I'm dying of hunger." At the sound, the wild creature flew up and came at us. Dabe called out again. At that, all the fear went out of the stranger. He stuck his spear into the sand and came forward, as you see him here, shy and friendly, to find out what sort of people we were. We'd made our contact at last.